Hey everyone, and welcome to this Blender experiment. So, recently I saw a tutorial for doing little tiny surface ripples across a large body of water. So I kind of wanted to experiment with my own version of it, because in theirs they had ripples across the entire thing, and I was thinking of maybe painting an area to just have the ripples, like around a post or something. So what I've done is I've created a 16 by 16 grid, about 8 units big, and I'll create a texture to put on that grid that I can paint on later. And I'll just set up my water material real quick so that we can see the effects of it. Now I'll create a believable source for the ripples to come from. So I'll make a sort of wooden post thing that's holding up something, I don't know what, and I'll add a quick material on that. Next, I'll add a ground plane underneath the water so that I can cast shadows, and I decided that I wanted to make it kind of curved and make it look more like a pond sort of thing. So now I'm just adjusting the material so that the shadows look nice. And of course, it can't do without a material, so got to UV unwrap it and add kind of a sand material thing. So now we can actually get onto what I was thinking. So I was originally thinking of just painting the texture by hand, but then I remembered dynamic paint. So my thought here was to have the log object painting its own ripple texture, if that makes sense. But looking at some of the settings in dynamic paint, I found this one called waves, and that one really intrigued me because I didn't know that you could distort the mesh with dynamic paint. So after playing around with it for a little bit, I kind of decided that I didn't really like what Waves was doing, or didn't understand what it was doing. So next I switched it to Displace, and I kind of experimented with like all of the options to figure out what they're doing, because I wasn't really getting any results. I was trying to use the attribute node, and I don't think I understood it completely. So after playing around with like vertex groups, I switched it back to just plain paint. So I've used the paint option in dynamic paint before, so I kind of knew what I was doing by setting up the wet map and playing around with the spread options, but I wasn't really getting much action out of my stationary log, obviously. So I'm going to add a sphere and kind of animate it around to kind of get some movement and really test out my idea. So you can see the animation I made here. And now we can adjust some of our spread settings. I did notice after adding the animated ball that the displace does something. It kind of like carves into the surface. So that's nice to know. Back to the paint now. We can get started working on implementing the material. So I'm going to start by adding a waves texture, because technically there should be like rings coming off, so I'm trying to make it look like water. And I'm going to have it affect the normal input of my water shader. So here I wanted less vertices than I had originally created, so I just started over with my mesh. And after rebaking my wet map, I started playing around with how the wet map should affect the texture, because I wasn't really getting the result I wanted out of the way it was. So just a lot of tweaking is what I did here, playing with how subtle the distortion is and just how it's all affected. But now on to setting up the camera and the rest of the scene to get it rendered, because I was pretty happy with it at this point. So as you can see, it's not the best. The ripples are a little bit square and like they're being affected by some sort of alien force field or something. They're not very ripply. I'm not very happy with this render, so let's see what we can do. Let's switch it from paint to waves and see if that changes anything. Well, would you look at that? We could get waves without having to do all of the material stuff in the first place. So I guess we'll just delete all of the stuff that we've done so far and start over with this new displacement type, which looks a lot better because it's simulation based. So pure form here, adjust the material and the displacement. So as with every simulation thing, let's just fiddle with the settings a whole bunch till we get something we like the look of. Then let's get on to making the material a little bit more complex than just straight water, because with all water there's like, bubbles and stuff that we should add to the top. That's looking pretty nice. Now, I'm not quite liking the look of my scene, so I'm just gonna change some of the lighting and maybe the camera angle. I'm kind of just looking at it, trying to figure out how I could make it maybe a little bit more visually interesting. I think maybe adding something that could cast cool shadows and reflections might be fun, so I made this deck object. I think the land needs to be a little bit further out and a little bit more random, and the ball needs a material because it has the same material as the land, I think. So let's just add some stripes on there with a wave texture. And I think one isn't enough of these pillar objects, so I'm going to use the array modifier to add a few more into the background. That's looking a bit better. Now, I thought this was a really great chance to experiment with the size option on the lights. See how changing that makes them sharper or fuzzier. I just think that's a really cool demonstration and really easy to see. Now I'm going to move over to the compositor and set up some post-processing effects, mainly this mist to kind of fill in the background. I tried adding a little bit of sparkle, but I didn't really like it. Let's turn on some motion blur, give it a test render, and I think we're ready to render it out. Let's go. So, this is the result. It's pretty good looking. I mean, it looks better than the first one I did. I don't like the foam I put on top. It looks funny to me. So after looking at that, I kind of spent a while tweaking it off camera, and this was the result. I think it's a bit better. I reanimated the ball, and I changed up the materials so that the foam on top wasn't quite as static and weird. But I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I hope you learned something. Thanks so much, guys, for watching my videos. I know that I was really late with this one. I spent like 3 weeks working on it, and there's no good reason why I did that. It just took me a really long time. So I'm sorry about that. I don't know when I'll be able to make another video because I'm moving, and so I kind of have to focus on that for a little while. I might be able to get some stuff out, but I don't know. Anyway, see you in the next one.